Goedenavond. Ik ben Eva Brems en ik heet u heel graag welkom bij de uitreiking van de Amnesty Leerstoel met Adam Bodnar. Dit is de 12e publiekslezing in het kader van de Amnesty International Leerstoel aan de Universiteit Gent. Omdat onze universiteit een internationale gemeenschap is en dit evenement een buitenlandse titularis heeft, zal u het mij natuurlijk niet kwalijk nemen dat ik overschakel naar het Engels. The Amnesty International Chair at Ghent University intends to raise awareness among the public at large on human rights topics through the invitation of renowned international guests. It's a joint initiative of Ghent University and the Flemish section of Amnesty International. Our first guest was Irene Khan, Amnesty International's then Secretary General. Later, we have received Nawal El-Saadawi, the women's rights activist from Egypt, Luis Moreno Ocampo, the then prosecutor at the International Criminal Court, Sister Jeanne de Vos, who works for child domestic workers in India, Thomas Hammarberg, the former Commissioner for Human Rights at the Council of Europe, human rights activist Solange Abonimana from Burundi, anti-death penalty activist Clive Stafford Smith, novelist Dave Eggers, former UN AIDS Director Peter Piot, the Iranian Nobel Prize winner Shirin Ebadi, and regional UNICEF Director Geert Kappelaren. Adam Bodnar, whom we are honoring today, is our 12th laureate. We chose him as our 2020 Amnesty Chair, which unfortunately had to be cancelled on account of the pandemic. We are so happy that he remained available for this year's Amnesty Chair, even though it has to be an online event. Amnesty Director Wies de Grave will introduce Adam Bodnar in a minute. Thanks to the creation of the Human Rights Research Network, an interdisciplinary consortium at our university, the Amnesty Chair, as a well-entrenched institution at our university, is receiving a new boost. This is a cause for joy because Amnesty International and Ghent University are an excellent match. Ghent University has adopted the slogan, "Dare to Think," indicating our commitment to fighting prejudice and our openness to challenging conventions. This is a statement that rejects all forms of academic myopia and ivory tower mentalities in favor of a university that engages with the society in which it functions and with the world at large. Many among our academic staff manage to combine high-level research with significant social commitment and to transmit the fruits of their research and thought not only in peer-reviewed journals, but also in the mass media and in various societal debates, from the global to the very local. Many are also dedicating significant time and energy to partnerships and research projects with colleagues in the Global South. It is likewise invigorating to see so many of our students committing enthusiastically to various global and local causes. You see, here at Ghent University, we do not only dare to think, many of us also dare to speak out and dare to act. And frankly, today, speaking out for human rights here in Europe may be even more necessary than it was in 2007 when we started the Amnesty Chair. According to the VDEM Institute, the global decline in liberal democracy has been steep during the past 10 years, and the top 5 states where the decline has been strongest includes 4 Council of Europe member states, with Poland as a sad number 1, followed by Hungary and Turkey, as well as Serbia on number 5 after Brazil. Yet Poland is, in this context, still labeled a democracy by the same independent researchers that have labeled the other 3 electoral autocracies. Yet they do not use the term liberal democracy anymore. They use the term electoral democracy. Now, if this trend, this steep decline of liberal democracy is to be reversed, it will be thanks to the relentless efforts of human rights activists such as those of Amnesty International and of independent human rights institutions such as a human rights ombudsperson, if that post is filled by the right person, as exemplified, of course, by this year's Amnesty International chairholder at Ghent University, Adam Bodnar. I will now give the floor to Amnesty Director Wies de Grave, who will introduce Mr. Bodnar.
Thank you very much, Eva. Dear Mr. Adam Bodnar, dear Mrs. van Herwegen, Vice Rector of the University of Ghent, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Dear Mr. Bodnar, as Eva Brems was already mentioning, you are the 12th person to be honored in this way by the University of Ghent and by Amnesty International. One of the very first holders of the Amnesty Chair of the University of Ghent was the Egyptian writer, activist and physician Nawal El-Saadawi, as Eva was mentioning. She sadly passed away in March of this year. The traditional way of honoring such a loss is a moment of silence. But maybe a better way to honor this feminist icon is by starting this brief introduction with a quote from her. When she was asked in 2018 whether it wouldn't be wiser to tone down her criticism, she said, and I quote, "No, I should be more outspoken, because the world is becoming more aggressive, and we need people to speak loudly against injustices." Dear friends, I agree with Nawal El-Saadawi. I also think it's very likely that Mr. Bodnar, the guest we honor here tonight, agrees as well that we cannot be silent in the face of oppression and injustice. Professor Dr. Adam Bodnar, it's my honor to introduce you here today on behalf of the board, members and activists of Amnesty International Vlaanderen. For those that don't know, Mr. Bodnar is a law professor by training, and he put that training to good use. His resume as a human rights activist goes back to the 1990s. I won't list everything, but his work with the EU's Fundamental Rights Agency as director of the Helsinki Foundation and in many other capacities has made him respected, admired and influential as a Polish and European human rights expert. Unsurprisingly, he has received several human rights awards. But it is because of Mr. Bodnar's current role that we decided to honor him with the Amnesty International Chair 2020-21. Since 2015, Adam Bodnar serves as Polish ombudsman. In that post, he has the challenging task of leading Poland's national human rights institution during a time that the country's government seemed to turn its back to the rule of law and to human rights. There have been many worrying evolutions in Poland. We witness erosion of the independence of the judiciary, criminal charges used to curtail freedom of expression, further restrictions on access to abortion, widespread anti-LGBTI rhetoric from politicians, arrests of activists and plans to withdraw from international human rights treaties. And those are just some of the things Amnesty International documented in 2020 alone. I assume that Mr. Bodnar will further illustrate this during his lecture. In this context, the Office of the Human Rights Commissioner has been an important and steady line of defense for fundamental rights and freedoms. In Poland, it is the Human Rights Commissioner that is often a last resort for people in need of protection and those most at risk of discrimination. Women, people from smaller towns, the elderly, people with disabilities, people living in homelessness, people from minorities, LGBTI people, people in detention centers. All these and many more found a champion in Adam Bodnar and his team. Dear Mr. Bodnar, it was precisely for taking up this important role during a difficult time and for doing so with such clarity, commitment and conviction that the University of Ghent and Amnesty International wanted to honor you. But Mr. Bodnar, as you know, we decided to invite you over a year and a half ago. We had to postpone holding the actual ceremony due to COVID. Little did we know that the Polish authorities would make this new timing of the award significantly more meaningful. Earlier this month, on the 15th of April, Poland's Constitutional Tribunal ruled that Adam Bodnar cannot continue in his role of ombudsman for much longer. In other words, the authorities pushed out Adam Bodnar. Civil society has dubbed this as a hostile takeover by the parliamentary majority and is very worried, not in the least, that the government will try to install someone who would not defend the independence and integrity of this important mandate. Either way, later this year, Adam Bodnar will have to hand over the proverbial keys to his successor. Who that successor will be is not yet clear, and not all is lost. Many Polish people will fight to make sure that replacing Mr. Bodnar happens in accordance with the provisions of Poland's constitution and for the independence and impartiality of the ombudsman. We will stand with them. Dear Mr. Bodnar, dear Adam, if I may, we are truly honored to welcome you today. On a more personal note, I want to say that from time to time, I speak with my colleague Draginia and her Amnesty team in Poland, as well as with Amnesty members in your country. In these conversations, your legacy and your current leading role for human rights in Poland becomes very clear. But equally important, many of them have testified on how essential your work was and is for all Polish citizens who are standing up for what is right, who are not afraid to be silenced, and who find the courage to defend humanity. I feel humbled to also extend their profound gratitude to you tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, let today be a celebration of Adam Bodnar's remarkable performance as Commissioner in recent years. In the face of very difficult circumstances, he stood up for the values that underpin human rights and equality. But let the Amnesty Chair also be a signal of our solidarity with the members of the Ombudsman team, with Polish civil society, and with all Polish citizens who deserve and need strong institutions to defend and fulfill their human rights. With that, I gladly pass the floor to the Vice-Rector, Mrs. van Herwegen, for the official award ceremony. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you, Eva. It's a bit strange to have an official award ceremony when the other person is in another country, but let's try and do it this way. This has been a very long collaboration between Ghent University and Amnesty International with respect to this human rights chair, and we're very proud that we are able to continue that. And I have, on behalf of Ghent University, I have the honor to bestow upon you the Amnesty International Chair for 2021 for your remarkable performance and your relentless devotion to your work as Ombudsman and as Human Rights Commissioner in Poland in increasingly difficult circumstances. Normally, I would give this to you. This is a medal that comes with the chair. It says Inter utrumque. I don't know whether people can see it. Inter utrumque. And here it says Ghent University. And at the back it says Dr. Adam Bodnar, 28th of April 2021, Amnesty International Chair. I'm just going to hand it over to you symbolically, but we'll send it to you by mail at some point in the next few weeks so that you can actually also physically hold on to it. And with that, I'm very happy and I'm very honored to be able to give you the floor for your lecture. We would normally have a round of applause. Again, that's not possible. It feels strange not to have this applause. But you know what? Let us applause.
Dear Madam Rector, dear Mr. Director, dear Professor Brems, I would like to start by saying that it is an extreme privilege to me to be bestowed with this wonderful recognition of the Ghent University and Amnesty International. And I would like to say that it is of particular importance to me because I had a pleasure once to be in Ghent to speak and to cooperate with Professor Brems on some human rights issues, but also I had a pleasure to have some lectures supervised by Professor Yves Heck when I was participating in this scheme of Erasmus exchange scholars. It was really a great privilege to be there and to see this great university. And so when I received this message some time ago, it was really one of the most wonderful signs of recognition of my work and of my team. But I would like also to say that a little bit about times we are living in, times in Poland, because this is Amnesty International chair. And this name means a lot in Poland, the name of this organization. Not only because of the wonderful leadership role of Draginia Nadazdin and her team over last years, not only because Draginia is subject of a lot of problems and reprisals because of her work, but mostly because of the fact that in 70s and in 80s, Amnesty International was also compelled to recognize people from Poland, people who were at that time political prisoners. And there are a number of people who were basically counting on, who were getting those letters and signs of solidarity coming from abroad when they were basically sitting in prison. And it is my particular privilege to cooperate these days with some of them. Even today, we had the second anniversary of passing away of a very distinguished Polish dissident, Professor Karol Modzelewski. And he was one of those people who were basically jailed for his views, for his for his actions towards Poland's independence and Poland's democracy. And I think nobody predicted that we'll be at this stage once again in Poland, that Amnesty International has to take care about anybody from Poland. Not just people who are some refugees coming to Poland seeking for protection, seeking for a good place to stay, but that Amnesty International has to take into account people who are human rights defenders or who are even more acting in the official capacity, because I'm still the civil servant of Poland. You mentioned properly, Mr. Director, that the Constitutional Court has adjudicated on my case just 2 weeks ago on 15th April, but still basically I'm still the civil servant, and I have to serve until 15th July in order to protect as much as I can rights of Polish citizens. And also, I treat it as my mission to save the institution for the future. And I do hope that thanks to that kind of recognition, but also interest of number of Polish civil society members, but also international organizations, there is a chance to secure that maybe this office, that I will be able to pass keys to the office of the Ombudsman to somebody who is elected in a proper constitutional way. That is basically my dream, my most important dream for upcoming weeks, to guarantee this, that the new Ombudsman is elected in a way to give a proper continuation of the work of the office, and believe and will give this feeling of integrity to the Polish citizens, that they will have that they will bring some legitimacy into the operation of this office. So let's hope it happens. And I would like also to say that I treat this recognition not just as a personal recognition, but as a recognition to the whole team of the Ombudsman Office. We are altogether 300. Plus, we have a lot of experts, members of social councils, expert committees who are working with us on different human rights issues. And each of us is contributing smaller or bigger brick to the whole effort of the office, and also to showing that fight for human rights basically starts with every single detail. And even today, we had a very important case before the Constitutional Court, this Constitutional Court, concerning whether the Court of Justice may issue preliminary injunctions concerning Polish judiciary, and the Constitutional Court was going to hear whether that kind of a power by the Court of Justice is in compliance with the Polish Constitution. So you can imagine that what could be the potential effect of that kind of a judgment if the court would find it unconstitutional, that it would mean just another battle between Poland and the European Union, battle that would not be in favor of Polish citizens, to be honest. But I would like to mention that even, this case today, we had a very small success because thanks to the participation of one of our experts in the hearing, Dr. Paweł Filipek, we've managed to push the Constitutional Court to postpone the hearing. So even that kind of small victories are something of a great satisfaction, because it shows that if you are trying to use your powers as much as you can, then you can achieve a lot of good results. So once again, I treat it as a recognition of basically not only of me but of my whole team, and thank you very much for this. I have prepared for today's evening a small presentation because I think it is important to underline what are basically the problems in Poland connected with rule of law and democracy. Please note that I work also at the SWPS University in Warsaw, and basically I teach human rights there. So if I may please, next slide, then maybe it would be easier to present. Or maybe I will start a presentation from my side. Okay, I hope it is visible now. If I may ask for confirming that everything is okay.
Yes.
Yes,
it is okay.
Fantastic. Okay, so let me start by saying what is the Polish road towards constitutional crisis? Because, that is what we experienced in 2015, 2016. My great mentor, Professor Wyrzykowski, says that we are already after the constitutional crisis, that right now we do not experience crisis, but basically we are in a situation when the simply constitution has been broken, and right now the ruling party is taking advantage of reforms that have been implemented. But before we got there, I think we should a little bit concentrate on previous era. So I think the most important date is 89, when Poland started economic and democratic transformation, and when Poland builded the different rule of law mechanisms, including judicial independence, but also strengthening of the ombudsman institution or the constitutional court. The new constitution has been adopted in 1997, and basically in the 90s and later in 2004, we have first joined Council of Europe, then the NATO and the European Union. And Poland over those years has experienced a lot of, let's say, satisfaction with the development, and a lot of people experienced economic growth and stability. But at the same time, we could see, especially after a couple of years of European integration, that we have a growing disparity in income, that people living in smaller cities in rural areas are not enjoying to the same extent this period of growth, this period of stability, that some people feel neglected and they lack some kind of a vision of the further development of the state. But what is also important is that there was a little bit lack of understanding why rule of law matters for the people, because of the pretty short tradition of liberal democracy in Poland. We didn't have, let's say, a few centuries to build the concept of liberal democracy and rule of law. Basically, we had to do it quite quickly after 89. In 2015, using some of those elements of the people's dissatisfaction, but also something like a politics of identity, Law and Justice Party, headed by Jarosław Kaczyński, won parliamentary elections. And despite having, despite the fact that the Law and Justice Party didn't have a constitutional majority, the Law and Justice implemented reforms using simply absolute parliamentary majority, and having the control in both chambers of parliament, in the Sejm and Senate, and having also the loyal president who is coming from the same camp. So basically this passing of a series of legislation, plus some elements, plus some serious incidents of violating the constitution paved the way to make a road towards illiberal democracy, using the famous notion created by Farid Zakaria. So here you see on this screen the courtroom of the Polish Constitutional Court. It is the photo of the Constitutional Court when it was, I took it personally, when I was, I think the last time on 13th December 2016, when this court was still independent. And basically, that was, I think, the most important element of the reform, the subordination of the Constitutional Court. And by adoption of a series of different laws, but also by different manipulations concerning the court's composition, but also later subordination of different other institutions like the prosecutor's office or courts. And basically the government started to use, once again, Hungarian word, salami tactics. So one slice after the other, different independent institutions were taken over. But please note, not always it was about creating a direct influence on decision-making of those institutions, but rather it was about aiming towards achieving a certain end effect. So simply that some institutions are silent, or that some institutions are inactive, or they do not serve the purpose of accountability of the government. The Constitutional Court has been marginalized as an instrument of opposition, because under the Polish system, the Constitutional Court was quite often used in order to challenge legislative acts adopted by the ruling majority, and the opposition was using this. But more importantly, the Constitutional Court did not stay just silent. It started to be used as an instrument to achieve political goals, like, for example, in the recent judgment on access to legal abortion. And I think that, we can quite openly say that Poland is going, or is maybe has some features of the system of competitive authoritarianism. This system could be described using a very interesting football type description. So this is a system in which you, in theory, have two teams, but one team is playing with 11 football players, and the other team is playing with 8 football players. So this 8 football players team, being the opposition, certainly has still chances to win elections, to take over the power, but it is extremely difficult. And I think there are a number of elements of the system in Poland that put Poland into this frame of being a system of competitive authoritarianism. But please note, it was also possible because the ruling party has managed to create a total control over use of the public media, and some of the institutional reforms have been simply justified with different propaganda activities by the public media. The state of exceptionality has been abused in order to achieve some political effect. So basically we are in the state for over 1 year. And even just a couple of days ago, one more example, the party has decided to postpone elections in one of the bigger cities, and it is quite obvious to everybody that this decision was made just on the basis of just with the use of some exceptionalist policies provided by the COVID. And also we see like the growing mixing role of the state and as an owner, as a decision maker, and we see especially the growing role of the state-owned companies. Also, we observe use of strategic lawsuits against public participation against political opponents. So one of the prominent victims of that kind of a practice is a famous law professor, Professor Wojciech Sadurski, who is not only a great constitutional scholar, but he's a fierce critic of the government. Altogether, he's having a couple of cases that are litigating against him and that are brought by the ruling party or by the Polish public television. And I think that it is important in this whole process is the process of political subordination of courts. And You know, it would be quite difficult to analyze in detail what happened over those years, but I think it is important to start with the quotation from Lewicki and Ziblatt, who stated in their book, How Democracies Die. They said, process of eliminating referees as enemies of any autocrat does not take place overnight. And basically, this process is happening in Poland for last 4 years, starting from more or less 2017. And it concerned such issues like appointment of court presidents in common courts, just solely by the Minister of Justice. It consisted of hate campaigns organized by the state against judges, controlling the process of judicial nominations via, because of the, once again, loyal president and the National Council of Judiciary that has been subordinated to the ruling majority, creating some rules for the early retirement for judges that were pushing them to leave judiciary, and it applied especially to the Supreme Court judges. And if not the intervention by the European Commission and the Court of Justice, some of them would not be able to adjudicate even until the end of their official terms. Also by creating some levels of political control over top judicial institutions, such as the National Council of Judiciary, the Supreme Court, by creation of 2 special chambers in the Supreme Court, especially the disciplinary chamber, by use of disciplinary and penal procedures in order to lift judicial immunity against judges, by moving judges between court division or suspension of judges as a result of judgments issued by the disciplinary chamber of the Supreme Court, but also targeting selecting judges, but by friendly media, friendly governmental media. But also, please note that this process would not be possible if not the, like I would say, an offer to those judges that would like to make a quick career. So this process did not just take place in a let's say vacuum, but there were people who wanted to enjoy some benefits, some profits as a result of this change, and basically it has been used effectively by the executive power. And finally, I would say that this whole process of like the constant vibrant atmosphere around judges is creating a permanent atmosphere of fear. We name it in the human rights language chilling effect. And here you see one of the most important, in my opinion, the judge who is a metaphor of what happens to the Polish judiciary. One of the most decent people I know, one of the most honest and determined people in Poland, Judge Igor Tuleya, who has been subject of procedures aiming towards lifting his judicial immunity. And he has been suspended as a judge. And can you imagine that for last 2 days, on last Thursday and Friday, he was standing alone in the crowd of people supporting him in front of the Supreme Court because he couldn't agree on this, that the disciplinary chamber of the Supreme Court, which is a kangaroo court, which is a very dubious court from the point of view of legal standards, but also jurisprudence of the Court of Justice of the European Union, because this court was going to make a decision whether he should be handcuffed and taken to the prosecutor's office for crimes that he didn't commit, and I also claim that he did not commit those crimes. And Judge Tuleya, with his position and with his attitude, became a huge symbol for Poland, for Polish judiciary, and I think for the whole world. What does it mean to defend your position with a great dignity? But he's just one of many, many other judges who are facing reprisals because of their actions, and it's my greatest honor to be in this capacity of the ombudsman and still somehow to support them, but also to intervene in number of cases, not only domestically, but also before the Court of Justice of the EU and before the European Court of Human Rights. But of course, we can analyze different stages of things that happen in Poland, but we should start the question why this crisis of the rule of law happened. And there are some reasons for this. So first one is that over those years of transformation, that we didn't really create an effective judiciary. So when the government started to argue that, you know, right now we need to reform the judiciary, most people would agree, yes, we should reorganize judiciary in order to make it more effective. But the problem is that the government understood completely different thing under creating reforms to the judiciary. So all the reforms were aimed towards subordination and not more effectiveness. And quite interestingly, even after those years, if we look into statistics, in fact, Polish courts are working slower than before those reforms started. Second, we could see something like a distance between the judiciary and the regular people. So the government claimed that, you know, we need to bring more legitimacy to the judiciary, which means that we should bring judges closer to the people, and it was more like, and it was regarded as a justification for some of the reforms. And to be honest, I could also see, being a human rights lawyer, I could see also that judges are a little bit like distancing themselves from the society in order to keep their judicial integrity, but it meant also that sometimes they didn't have like this clear understanding of real problems of the people. Second, I think that it is important that when politicians referred to, when they implemented reforms, it is quite important that in this, let's say, communist mentality, we had that kind of a feeling, and it was basically built between 45 and 89 in Poland, that if you are doing certain things, you should basically understand that there are certain limits you shouldn't cross, that otherwise you will have a problem. And it was quite easy for the politicians these days to come back to that kind of to that kind of habits in thinking, that, you know, you shouldn't interfere with certain things, you shouldn't be too, you know, courageous in making different statements, and basically that kind of an attitude creates a fertile ground for making chilling effect and radical changes in the mindset of people who are performing different positions. Finally, there were some examples of abuse of the legislative process for political purposes, and basically those examples happened not just after 2015, but also before. I remember that even with Prime Minister Donald Tusk, we had some individual situation when he could speed up the legislative process in order to adopt some legislative acts within 2-3 days. So when the Law and Justice came to power, simply they started to use the same thing, but they started to do it, you know, 10 times more often than it was made with the previous government. And finally, we could experience that Polish people, because of the low level of civic education and insufficient period of building the rule of law, they do not have this understanding of abstract values like the independence of judiciary. And at the same time, the government promoted different kinds of social rights and different levels of different new methods of distribution of state resources in order to achieve, in order to convince people that they are bringing something good to the people. And when you could, when the people had to decide, you know, what is more important to them, and at the same time they didn't have this understanding what does it mean that the government is making an attack on courts, simply they preferred social stability and, you know, more protection of social rights or better distribution of state resources to their own benefit. And once again, it created a ground for this crisis of the rule of law. But please note, we had all those problems, but we had also a lot of resistance. And this symbol here on this screen has become a symbol of the resistance of Polish people, Polish civil society, Polish lawyers. It says Konstytucja. But please note, it is constitution in Poland, basically, but this word says in white ty and in red ja, which means in Polish you and me. So it means that the constitution is for you and me. And basically, this symbol has been created in 2017, and it became like a connecting factor and connecting symbol to all different people and organizations that were fighting for the protection of the of the constitutional language. And I think here we should especially remember about this statement from the lesson number 2 of Timothy Snyder, who wrote, "It is institutions that help us to preserve decency. They need our help as well. Do not speak of our institutions unless you make them yours by acting on their behalf. Institutions do not protect themselves. They fall one after the other unless each is defended from the beginning. So choose an institution you care about, a court, a newspaper, a law, a labor union, and take its side." And I think it is one of the most important lessons I have ever read, I have ever listened to, because in fact, what Polish people try to do with different results is basically protecting institutions. Moreover, I have experienced this personally because, you know, some of the Polish citizens decided to defend the institution of the ombudsman. And when the Constitutional Court was challenging my position 2 weeks ago, it was a great privilege and great honor, but also obligation on my side that in front of the Constitutional Court, there were a number of Polish citizens who were basically there with me, who were trying to protect their own institution, the institution of the ombudsman. But before that happened, Polish people defended the Supreme Court. Please note, it is one of the, I think, most important photos made during demonstrations. It was the photo in front of the Polish Supreme Court with the slogan, which is projected with a projector on the building of the Supreme Court, saying, "It is our court." And people are holding 3 candles in order to symbolize the division of powers in Poland. And interestingly, this photo has been made by Chris Niedenthal, a very famous photographer in Poland who made spectacular photos during the martial law in 80s in Poland. So for Chris Niedenthal, everything that happens these days is a little bit like, you know, like rewriting the history. It is like coming back to those fights that were taking place in Poland in 80s. And can you imagine, you know, a crowd of people, you know, thousands of them in all different cities that were shouting, "It is our court, independence of judiciary," or even such slogans like, you know, "free division of powers." You know, these are not typical slogans used during demonstrations. So I think it is a very important aspect that upon this fight for the rule of law, upon this attack on the rule of law, there was a lot of response by the Polish people. So there was a reaction by the civil society, by demonstrations, sit-ins, petitions, transnational networks of cooperation. The Judicial Association Justitia, composed of 3,000 judges, became extremely important. Bar Association reacted in numerous ways. National human rights institutions like my office, but also the office of the previous Ombudsman for Children, Mr. Marek Michalak. There were a number of legal education programs created in order to tell to the people, listen, you know, it is something important that is happening. You should take care, because without independent courts, you will not have a protection of rights. We have also experienced pressure by international organizations, comprehensive opinions on draft legislation by ODIHR, by Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights of OSCE, by the Venice Commission. We had a visit of the UN Special Rapporteur on Judicial Independence. I could count on the support of Niels Muizhnieks, the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Council of Europe. But most importantly, there were different legal and political actions taken by the European Union. But it is quite interesting that Poland, on the one hand, the EU tried to react, but at the same time, Poland became a little bit like the laboratory for EU actions. Because please note, until 2018, the EU didn't have good procedures and good legal standards to protect judicial independence. In fact, they have been created first with famous case of the Portuguese judges, ASJP, and later on with a couple of Polish cases. And those cases have been brought as a result of infringement actions taken by the Commission, as a result of preliminary references made by Polish courts fighting for their independent status, but also by foreign courts that started to ask a question, okay, can we still use the European arrest warrant with respect to the people that should be sent to Poland if we cannot have a guarantee that these persons will have a fair trial in Poland. And recently, the Amsterdam court has decided that they will never ever, as long as Polish judiciary is not corrected and is not brought to the compliance with judicial independence standards, they will not execute any European arrest warrant. But also there were a lot of political actions, like Article 7 procedure, the last year rule of law report, and adoption of the conditionality regulation. And some of those elements, as you know, they are subject of further development. I do believe that maybe in future they will be effective with respect to such countries like Poland. But as of now, it seems that only some of the actions of the Commission and the Court of Justice proved to be effective. And sometimes you have a feeling that Commission is not working with the speed that you should expect from the guardian of the EU, from the EU treaty. The same with the Court of Justice. Sometimes procedures are taking too much time. And basically, in the meantime, the Polish authorities, Polish ruling party is using the time in order to achieve some significant effects domestically. And here you see a graphics by Jerzy Janiszewski, which is a very symbolic picture of approximately 60 Polish judges of the Supreme Court that more than 1 year ago have made a joint resolution defending their independence. So this word behind their backs says independence of judiciary. So please note, it is like a reference to this famous solidarity trade union mark, and it is one of this, let's say, last acts of defense of the Polish independence. And we don't know right now whether Polish judiciary will survive as an independent. But for sure, I can say that all those judges who are on this screen, they tried to do everything what they could in order to protect the dignity of their office. And in the middle, you see Professor Małgorzata Gersdorf, who could serve as the last fully independent first president of the Supreme Court until the 30th April 2020. But if we talk about names, also on the screen, just next to the Chief Justice, Gersdorf, you see a gentleman with gray hair, whose name is Włodzimierz Wróbel. And Włodzimierz Wróbel, who was a candidate of this group of independent judges to the position of the president of the Supreme Court, and basically he failed in this in elections because the person who has been elected was to a great extent promoted by the ruling camp. This gentleman is going to face a hearing in another case before the disciplinary chamber of the Supreme Court. So basically, this kangaroo court, which is the disciplinary chamber, is not omitting anybody who could basically present a different opinion on the Polish judiciary. And one more photo, a very symbolic photo. In my opinion, it is the most important photo showing the value of the European integration, the photo of representatives of all different legal professions, attorneys, legal advisors, prosecutors, and judges, who are marching together with their colleagues from all EU member states, saying why the judicial independence is important. So you cannot, I think, find in the European Union the better example that this fight in Poland, it is not just about sake of one or the other judge, but it is the fight for the future of the European integration. You cannot find any other better example of the solidarity of judges and lawyers coming from other European Union member states, but also from such countries like Norway, signaling how much we do care about staying in Europe and being part of the European Union. So just a few words, I come closely to the conclusion, just a few words about my role. So Polish Ombudsman started operations in 1987. It has a significant constitutional and moral authority due to legacy of previous ombudspersons. We have 300 employees, including 200 lawyers with an expertise in different fields of human rights protection. And basically, since 2015, I tried to do everything what was possible in order to fight for independence of institutions responsible for protection of rights. The Constitutional Court, judiciary, also the prosecutor's office. And I try to use with my team all different legal possibilities, different interventions, legal opinions, my opinions and statements in front of two chambers of parliament, litigation before domestic courts, and also litigation before Court of Justice of the European Union, as well as amicus curiae briefs before the European Court of Human Rights. I'm quite happy that most probably on 19th of May, in the hearing before the European Court of Human Rights in case Ugent against Poland, my team and my office will be represented and will present this position, and maybe it will be one of the last accord of my term of my service as the ombudsman. But quite importantly, over those years, we tried to look beyond the rule of law crisis. We tried to be involved into all different other human rights issues, because we have a lot of those problems in Poland, but we tried to prove that this office of the ombudsman is not just for the sake of this, let's say, only fight for independent judiciary, but basically it is useful and it has a lot of practical things to do with respect to number of human rights issues, and our actions during the pandemic were, in my opinion, particularly important, but also concerning some other issues. But please note that this rule of law crisis has a huge impact on human rights, because first of all, this rule of law crisis that we face is creating a situation of lack of accountability for different human rights abuses. So sometimes it is quite naive even to claim that, or to expect that the prosecutor's office will react to different kinds of abuses that are committed, for example, by policemen or by other state actors. We experience different practices of so-called discriminatory legalism. This term has been created by Kurt Weiland by referring to the quotation from Oscar Benavides, president of Peru, who said, "For my friends, everything; for my enemies, the law." And that is what happens. You know, if you are the enemy of the government, then suddenly you are subject of a huge interest of all different services, police, prosecutor's office, and basically they will try to do everything not to forget that basically you are not with the ruling party, that you are somebody who is enemy. But also please note that kind of a practice is targeted with respect to all those people who even belong to the ruling camp, but from time to time might have some doubts concerning whether they should be still with the ruling camp. And even, you know, every day we have some examples of some like a very special targeting of different people by the whole machinery of the state. We have also in Poland, one of the methods to rule is the politics of identity connected with the national populism, and certainly it has some impact on the court's adjudication and also on practices and lack of sufficient protection of vulnerable minorities and groups, especially LGBT persons who are heavily targeted in Poland, but they cannot count usually on some support by the prosecutor's office or by some other actors. Quite otherwise, very often they are left alone with their problems. And, you know, I'm deeply honored that with some of the LGBT cases, I could stop the avalanche of negative things that happened to them over last couple of years. But also the institutions that have been captured, like the Constitutional Court, are used in order to achieve political aims. So first of all, some of the judgments of the court are creating legitimacy for governmental reforms, like, for example, subordination of the National Council of Judiciary has been justified with a judgment of the Constitutional Court. Second, restricting the access to legal abortion. So please note that this restriction has been created in order to circumvent powers of the parliament. So the Constitutional Court has been used or maybe even abused to achieve a certain political effect. And finally, my case, basically the aim of this case is to circumvent powers of the upper chamber, the Senate, in the appointment of the new ombudsman. Because without this case, I would serve as long as the new ombudsman is elected by both lower and upper chamber of the parliament. But with this judgment, basically, whatever happens, I have to go within 3 months. So it means on 15 July 2021. And there are some political and legal ways to circumvent the Senate in appointment of somebody who would fill in my shoes in the office of the ombudsman. But please note, Polish people are reacting. Here you see a photo of Polish women and their supporters against the ban on abortion. It was the demonstration that took place on 13th October 2020, and allegedly 100,000 Polish people participated in this demonstration. In fact, this photo is taken by one of the most prominent LGBT activists in Poland, Mr. Bart Staszewski. So basically, having in mind everything that happened, I can imagine that we might have 2 scenarios, the negative scenario and the positive scenario. The negative scenario is quite obvious: collapse of the rule of law, creating authoritarian state, rise of cronyism and corruption, creating a chilling effect of chilling effect on the political dissent and free speech, shrinking space for civil society and opposition, building a dual state in accordance with the theory of Ernst Frankl, when the prerogative state, so the political state, is winning with normative regulations. And also possibly at the end of this process, it could even mean the exit from the European Union. And in my opinion, it is not just a problem of Poland, it could be a problem for the whole European Union, whether EU, whether that kind of situation happening, not only in Poland, but also in Hungary, may lead towards destruction of the whole value of the European integration. But there might be also a positive scenario. Maybe those 6 years could be regarded in future that Poland was simply a laboratory for democracy, that all those negative experiences was a little bit like the vaccine for the whole Europe, that we will learn some practices and some ideas and ways to respond that could be used later on in other parts of Europe. Maybe it is possible that we'll return to a democratic path due to the strong civil society, and maybe it is also possible that Poland will have a strong role in shaping future European Union. But basically, all of this depends naturally on the electoral decision one day, that Polish people will realize, what they would like to prefer, what kind of country they would like to live in. But as I said, in the system of competitive authoritarianism, it is not that easy to win elections in a normal way. We have such a famous Polish football player, Robert Lewandowski. So I claim that if the opposition is going to win elections one day, they must really not only be unified, but also they should have somebody like Lewandowski in their team in order to win elections in future. But it is not impossible. It might happen. So, but here you see also, young people who are demonstrating, that are a sign of hope for Poland. And also this whole situation should give us something like a set of, lessons learned. So first of all, what is the lesson learned for not only for Poland, but for whole Europe? The first thing is that institutional safeguards may not be strong enough to defend rule of law when legal culture is weak, the ruling party refers to so-called will of dominant majority, and when people enjoy economic prosperity. Second, even if international organizations are putting a pressure, this pressure could be ignored by would-be autocrats, and because there is no sanction behind it. The third lesson is that European Union should be consistent and consequent in using rule of law mechanisms. Sometimes I have a feeling that that European Union is, as I said before, forgetting that its primary role is to be guardian of a treaty, of treaties. Next point is that civil society may play an important role in protecting democracy, and I can give you hundreds of good examples of involvement of the civil society and its imaginative effort and understanding why we should fight for values. And we know also, we should also remember that you cannot fight against democratic backsliding if you do not have political rights and free speech. And right now, one of the biggest challenges in Poland is the fight for free speech. And finally, final lesson is that pandemic is a stress test for the operation of state. This test might be failed by the ruling party in Poland because Polish ruling party made a lot of mistakes, but also quite otherwise. If we get through the crisis connected with the pandemic, maybe once again using all those propaganda mechanisms, the ruling party will present it as a success story. And please imagine that the ruling party has a number of instruments to do it. But my major lesson out of those years is that simply you should be really consequent, determined, and imaginative regarding what happens on the ground. And you should react as soon as possible to all the dangers that are in front of you. And maybe you will not achieve immediate results, but at least at the end of the day, you may say that you did everything what you could in given circumstances. Once again, I would like to thank you very much for your attention and for this wonderful award. I really feel privileged, and I see it as a recognition of my work and my whole ombudsman team. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Bodnar, for this very rich account of the situation in Poland, an account that I found both fascinating and terrifying. But I want to thank you also for opening that big window of hope that emphasizes resistance, mobilization, and solidarity as forces for change, and emphasizes that this may be a temporary situation. The members of the audience will be are able via the chat to put questions to you. These appear here on a small iPad I have in front of me. But before going to that, I'm going to present our panelists, and we're going to have a small talk with the panelists. So our panelists here today are Wies de Grave, who was already presented, the director of Amnesty Flanders, and Alicja Gewsinska, who is a Belgian-Polish philosopher and writer and director of the philosophy program at the University of Buckingham in the UK. Welcome, Alicja. It's nice to have you here with us today. And I would like to start for both of you with an open question. Having heard this very rich account and thinking of your own engagement with the situation in Poland, what resonates particularly with you? What did you find particularly striking? Alicja?
Thank you. Big question indeed to start with, because I'm following the situation quite closely, as it's my country where I was born. And I was also very happy with the message of hope at the end, and that we did not stick only with the negative things, because very often, and this is quite a frustration for me here in Belgium, living in Belgium, that Poland always comes in the media when things go wrong and all the negative things. So throughout the years, people tend to talk about the Poles as backward people that do not understand what democracy is, that they are not mature in a political sense. And that frustrates me, because I also see all those women on the streets, thousands of thousands, week after week after week, and people that really fight, just like you are an example of that. So I think this story has two sides, and I think this is so good about the talk, that it was not only the negative side, but also this positive vibe of people that really do understand what the rule of law and the importance of it. And there is already a lot of maturity in Poland. And I'm also, because of all those thousands of people, and because of you, I remain also hopeful.
But at the same time, let's say you as a philosopher, when you hear these labels of competitive authoritarianism, illiberal democracy, I think we can put that question to you. Are we witnessing a crisis of liberal democracy that is broader than Poland, broader than Europe? Are we witnessing the end times of human rights? Or is it just the balance of power, where one day people are progressive and the other day they become more conservative and they want to stop abortion and things like that? What is your take on that?
Well, I think the case in Poland is very interesting, and I also agree that we can learn a lot from it. And the mistake we could make is to think that what happens in Poland, as you say, sometimes the left wins, sometimes the right, and now it's the right, and the right is doing those things. What I don't think this story is right versus left or progressive versus conservatives. What is happening that in Poland, and it's the right at this that is doing it, has illiberal tendencies. It's actually a story of people that defend liberal democracy and those who defend illiberal democracy. And this is very dangerous. And this is completely different than being a conservative. I actually think that the case of Poland shows that it's not a triumph of conservative days there. Because a true conservative, he knows the importance of the rule of law. He defends the separations of powers. He thinks the independence of judiciary is almost sacred, I would say. This is what true conservatism is about. This is not where Polish Peace Party politics is about. So something else is at stake there. And what is at stake? That they are defenders of an illiberal democracy, which is very dangerous. And I think we should look to that and be very careful and see the signs, because those illiberal tendencies are also present here and there. And there are people that also start to defend the illiberal democracy. So I actually prefer to talk about Poland as a crisis as well of the liberal democracy, and people start to defend just out loud. You have Ryszard Legutko, for example, who has written a book about it, that he defends openly the illiberal democracy. And this should be a shock to all of us. This man is just sitting in the European Parliament. And this goes way deeper than just, oh, I'm conservative and I'm liberal and I'm on the left or whatever. This goes to the heart of Europe and of everything we have built up throughout the ages.
Yeah, a bit that I also found particularly terrifying was the examples Mr. Bodnar gave of what you might call simple sloppiness in procedures and institutions, where you say, oh, we'll skip normal parliamentary procedures and make a special procedure, and then you get new rulers in place and they abuse that sloppiness. That sort of, that maybe our institutions may not be robust enough once they are taken over by new rulers who may not have the same loyalty to democracy and rule of law that those who drafted these institutions had in mind. So do you think who knows Belgium as well as Poland, it might happen here even?
I think it can happen everywhere. I think the worst thing you can do is to think it will never happen here, because then you start to close your eyes. And I think this is a mistake that is often made, that when it's your party or your political leaders of choice, then you think, oh, well, yeah, they can do that. They can do something like this or like that. But you always have to keep in mind, there can, in the next election, somebody else will win. And if you make exceptions for your people, well, then you created a pathway. So you have to be always very strict, and that's why I really admire thinkers, and very often they are on the conservative side in the philosophy, who really think that the rule of law, the independence of a judiciary system, and also the separations of powers is something holy. You never touch it.
Yeah, for me as a scholar of law, it's a fascinating story of, at the same time, the power of law for the good, the core value of strong legal institutions, but also the same institution as a vulnerable point in the whole system. Let's keep in mind that even in Belgium, we have openly political appointments in the Constitutional Court. We're sort of unapologetic about
yes, and in the media or here and there.
Yeah.
And if you allow that,
yeah.
well, you created a precedent.
Yeah. Troubling idea, really. We is turning to you. We heard this message of hope also, which is in all these people taking the streets, these people fighting for their rights. But you mentioned, and Mr. Bodnar also mentioned the example of your Amnesty colleague who is being harassed. And if I take a look at the Amnesty website and actions that are out there, I see a lot of evidence that it's not so easy these days to defend human rights in Poland and some other countries. So the human rights defenders themselves might be at risk.
Yes, I think that's for sure, and we know that. I know that from talking to my colleagues, and Mr. Bodnar mentioned it as well. Of course, as Amnesty, as a human rights organization, we come into the debate on, and then there was also a specific slide on it, like the human rights impact of this evolution. So we come into the debate from that angle. We are on the streets to defend and to protest whenever human rights are at stake, when there is a rollback on women's rights, when there is a rollback on LGBTIQ rights, the attack on abortion and so on. But what I thought was really interesting is that you see that it is not really the result, or that's parallel with that, let's say, authoritarian turn in the country, and this that we somehow look at the human rights violations, or we read in the news about the LGBTIQ-free zones and stuff like that. That's highly symbolic, and we say, how on earth is that possible? But then I think what was very good in the lecture is how this process was explained. It's about purchase of media, it's this political subordination of courts, it's the lack of accountability, it's the violation of the law, and so on. And in this context, these human rights violations happen. And what is really troubling is that people who are discriminated, whose rights are violated, can no longer turn to anyone like. But they still can, and I'm very happy about that. And let's hope and let's fight that they can in the future to an ombudsman and other human rights institutions and courts. And that's where I realize, and I knew, but I realize again, that of course human rights are somehow, I call it sometimes a moral compass, and we see it as an emancipation of people, and we want to empower people to claim them. But they are vulnerable at the same time, and they need that shield. They need a shield to protect them. If that shield is breaking down, like in Poland, we are in real trouble. And then, indeed, not only those activists are not protected, there are a lot of death threats, for example, in the last weeks and months to our colleagues and other activists in Poland. People are not protected properly, but at the same time they are also attacked by the judiciary, as Mr. Bodnar was mentioning. So not protected and extra under attack, and I think that's a really difficult situation. And just final point, I think it points to the real importance of this evening and showing solidarity with everyone who fights for human rights in Poland, because that solidarity is a way to protect and encourage the citizens in Poland to keep going on the streets and keep fighting for what's right.
Yeah, and I know when I saw the picture of the different legal professions marching on the street, I know I've seen pictures like that sent to me by magistrates from Belgium that I know and told me, see, I'm taking action for human rights. I hope it helps. We do see a lot of that also.
Yes, but I think we have to take it a step further as well. And really, Mr. Bodnar also mentioned the EU and the Article 7, for example. But to be honest, okay, that it was important that in Article 7 was invoked, but not too much happened until now. Like, for example, now the Council of the EU, they have meetings on rule of law and so on. They had one a few days ago. They will have another one in a few days under Portuguese chairmanship of the council. They should really, for example, start hearings on the situation in Poland and really do something within that Article 7 process, and not only take that symbolic step. So I think it's not only about solidarity with activists. It has to go hand in hand with this political action within the EU, because the solution will indeed be within the EU. I think that's the best way to move forward.
We should pressure for more action. So we should not be just expressing solidarity, but pressure our own MPs in the European Parliament.
I think so,
I totally agree. I totally agree with that. I think if we will just look to Poland like, oh, we are safe here and something very strange is happening there, we miss a big chance of changing something within the EU, taking the power, protecting a country, protecting the rule of law within our European, on our European continent. And if we don't do that, if we don't show that solidarity and that importance, then it also shows that we don't understand the importance of rule of law. Because we always look down and think, oh, they don't understand it. Maybe we don't understand it because we don't defend for him. Why are we not on the streets for them as well? So I think that is very important, that the EU should be more active and more outspoken, and we as well, because as also you already explained, now that peace has the power, it will be very difficult to win the next elections for the opposition, because they can manipulate things so much easier now. So I'm not saying that Poland cannot make that change themselves, but we should not leave them to fix it for themselves. They are part of the EU, and it's also our responsibility.
On that note, let's turn to the audience. Mr. Bodnar, in the chat, there were very many congratulations and words of admiration and support for you. Let me start with that. And then there's also a series of questions. Some also sent in before, but those that were sent before, including by Peter and Guy, have largely been answered by you. Maybe let's take one question from Peter Kouwenbergs first to you. We see in the audience that people want to look beyond this crisis, and so the question this man is asking you is the turning point there already, or are there further steps that we should await before reaching that turning point for the good? Or do you think things will get worse before they get better?
I think it's a very good question, because it seems to me that a number of people in Poland, they expect this turning point to happen. And I think many of us believed that this judgment of the Constitutional Court on abortion of the last October 2020 was this turning point, because we had like a series of demonstrations. We had the emergence of the youth in demonstrations because they understood that it is their cause. But what happened is that the government was very skillfully silenced those demonstrations by using different methods, simply by taking time, by using repression by the police, by abusing the state of exceptionality and all those COVID restrictions in terms of presence of people in public places. And simply, after a couple of weeks, it appeared that those demonstrations are smaller, and in general, in January, they were not strong enough to put any significant pressure on the government. Also, whenever people demonstrating made some mistakes, like some strategic mistakes or some mistakes in type of a language that has been used during demonstration, immediately the state propaganda came into play and started to present them in a very negative way, as somebody who is not worthy of being respected or being followed. And so so there was, there was a chance for this turning point, but it wasn't. Right now we are discussing about the adoption of the recovery fund, but it seems that this discussion might end up with not like putting any limits on the governmental power, because the opposition simply cannot allow itself just openly to vote against the adoption of the recovery fund for Poland. So there are different political issues involved. So it seems it will not be a turning point. So simply, it might be like this, that we have to wait for simply elections. But in order for those elections to produce any change, any significant change, once again, I said, it requires the extraordinary effort of the opposition parties, and moreover, the understanding of the general public that those issues concerning protection of minorities, rule of law, women's rights, but also a certain alternative vision of Poland being a loyal member of the European Union, loyal member of the international community, that basically that kind of set of values should be expressed in a unequivocal fashion by the opposition. I hope that maybe the opposition will find something like a voice of making it happen. But please note, it is not just a regular fight between different competitors for power. It is a fight where one competitor, the ruling party, is having better cards, simply better cards because of the control over media, public media, because of the purchase of some private media, because of the use of the prosecutor's office for political purposes, and because of a number of other institutional ways to repress the opposition or activists. So it is possible, but we don't know what will happen. But I agree with Dr. Gościńska that Poland should not be left alone, basically. I think it is extremely important that European Union, but also other international organizations, are closely watching all the time what is happening. Not just because of some possible achievement of successes, because I can imagine that it might be extremely difficult, but just maybe to show a solidarity and show support to those who are fighting on the ground. It is extremely important. When I see, let's say, judges who are subject of solidarity efforts by their colleagues from other EU member states, they feel that they are still EU judges, not, people at some outskirts of the European Union who are basically forgotten by the whole world. And in this context, also, I expect that the Commission is much more decisive, that it shouldn't go into, creating another political avenue of resolving those problems, but simply it should use those avenues it has. And sometimes I have a feeling that because of political constraints, Commission is not doing what it should.
I'll put another question to you, an interesting one from Jochen. He's asking, how can a future government possibly repair the damage that has been done and restore the independence of the judiciary without having to use similar techniques as the one currently used by the government? And I think what Jochen means here, should they also just get rid of the current judges and replace them with new ones?
Another perfect question. Please note that even if there is a change in power as a result of parliamentary elections, still a number of institutions will be more or less controlled by the people, let's say, loyal to the ruling party. Let's imagine that in the new parliament, the legislative majority, the parliamentary majority is adopting different legislative acts, and then they are turned down by the Constitutional Court or by the president, and there is no enough votes to overrule, to reject the veto of the president. So you may end up in being in a situation of let's say, like a constant fight for adoptions of some new legislation, and people loyal to the ruling party will still have a number of instruments to counteract the possible change. But I think irrespectively of this danger, I think simply that right now a lot of people should prepare for some new times to come, because they may come sometimes even immediately. I know that there are a lot of activities by the civil society preparing some legislation for new times. But also, and I think it is even more important, it's not only about some technical preparation of the legislation, but it is about giving a feeling that if we try to order Poland once again, that if we do like this another breakthrough change like it was in 1989, then basically we should really do everything what is possible in order to treat institutions seriously, in order to treat the service for the people who are working for the government and for the whole state apparatus seriously. So I will just give you one example, one specific example. If any student of law would ask me, okay, Mr. Ombudsman, what should I choose as my future career? To be honest, I would not be able to answer like, you should be a judge or you should be a prosecutor, because I do not have, or you should be a diplomat, or maybe you should choose another public service, because I cannot give to this person a guarantee that this person may keep its professional integrity for next 10, 20, 30 years, that somebody new will not come that would try to destroy the integrity, independence of all those different professions. So I think that in case of this possible change, we should make really like a huge let's say like a new state social contract for the next generation, that we take the state seriously, that we rebuild the state in accordance with best models and with best expertise and guarantees of the continuation of the service, because we must regain the trust of the people into the state, trust especially of the young generation, that basically will remain a democratic country. Otherwise, they will choose private business or they will choose emigration, which is simply not good for the future of Poland. So this is I think generational effort after those 6 years. And just last one sentence, recently I had my class with my students, and I was explaining the value of the constitutional complaint, so the remedy which is brought to the Constitutional Court. So I tried and I presented this on the basis of some cases from 2012, 2013, one case concerning violation of religious feelings and the provision we are having in the criminal code on this. And then at a certain point, I realized that, I have students of the second, third year, and basically they don't know the independent constitutional code. They never had in their life independent constitutional code, because when it was operating, they were having, I don't know, they were 15, 16 years old. So it was not in their imagination that this code was ever independent, So that is a question of, the generational exercise and effort to repair things in Poland.
Wow, Adam, I mean, in a country that has experienced transition from communism only so recently, I mean, I'm old enough to have recognized the reference to Solidarność in that banner on judicial independence. So another transition is due. You described that very, very forcefully. Several members of the audience asked about the role of the EU. Taking up what has been said here, what exactly can the EU do? What is within its powers? Could the constitution of the EU make a difference? How far does Europe's influence stretch? These are questions from Willy, Kathleen, Aline, Alena, Alex, all members of our audience. So I'm wondering, could you expand a bit on what could realistically be done more by the EU institutions, assuming political will?
We don't hear
Right now, I would just expect from the European Union to do what is just exactly in its competence and what stems from basically treaties. So if there is an infringement procedure, then all those different cases basically should be made. Quite recently, another case has been submitted to the Court of Justice, but in my opinion, the Commission should do whatever it is possible in order to convince the Court of Justice to do judgment on this case as soon as possible. But for example, just like a very small issue, you remember this Judge Tuleya that was on the screen? I presented him as this metaphor for the Polish judiciary. He's suspended as a judge. He cannot perform as a judge because he was suspended by this kangaroo court. And Commission has brought a motion to the Court of Justice to make a preliminary injunction, preliminary measure to stop operation of the disciplinary chamber with respect to those immunity proceedings. And this motion has been submitted 1 month ago already, maybe 26 days ago. And I may ask a question, okay, so what are you waiting for? It's obvious. It is obvious what this disciplinary chamber is doing with this poor guy. So basically you should make a decision. You should have imagination that if you are not doing this, then basically this chamber is still operating. And even if they disrespect this, even if this chamber, let's say, disrespect your measure, then you should request penalties for disrespect. What about the Constitutional Court? The Constitutional Court is operating in a way which is highly dubious from the point of view of any standards, and it seems there is a silence on the part of the Commission, although the composition of the Constitutional Court was subject of Article 7 of the treaty. What about freedom of speech? Just recently, I have achieved a huge success, in my opinion, because we have managed to obtain a judgment of the court freezing the purchase by the Polish giant oil company of the press company. So basically, this transaction aims towards subordination to political will of 20 regional weeklies and dailies that were previously owned by a German owner. So basically, I appealed against the decision of the competition authority. I claimed that basically this decision should not be made because it is detrimental to freedom of speech and people's access to information. And to be honest, I don't see like a much of interest of the European Union into this issue. And please note, I understand this point that European Union does not have competence, but that freedom of speech is not it is something which is very much domestic. But how can you organize elections to the European Parliament in a fair way if you have media which are politically subordinated? It is a clear connection with the EU powers. And elections are also coming soon to the European Parliament. So maybe we should have more imagination. The same with my office. I didn't accept for one tweet from Vera Jourova. I didn't have any more reaction to the judgment of the Constitutional Court on my status. And it's not that I complain, but simply I'm the equality body under the EU directives. So I perform functions under the EU EU anti-discrimination directives, which means that Commission should be, in my opinion, more interested into this. But in addition to all those legal actions, I think it is important to make also symbolic actions. So, let's imagine what would be the situation of Judge Tuleya if Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen would meet him in person and would have a meeting with him just to show him solidarity. Is it really a violation of some, standard? It is a crossing of some political boundaries? I doubt it, So such symbolic actions are important in order to show to what is happening on the ground in Poland. And I think Commission should not just treat everything as some, political battles in which you might find some, its proper way, because otherwise somebody will be offended. Polish people would not be offended. Despite all different measures made by Franz Timmermans, and I said, once again, I will repeat it, Franz Timmermans will have one day a statue in the middle of Warsaw for everything what he did to the Polish judiciary. But please note that when he was doing all those actions under Juncker Commission and when he was the vice president, the level of support for the EU integration was exactly the same all the time. all the time 75% of support of the Polish people. So I asked a question. So why the Commission is so much afraid? So are they afraid of maybe, you know, going down from 75 to 72? You know, I think it's not enough, you know, to be not to be active and vigorous about respect for the rule of law.
Thank you. That is so persuasive. We are at the time when we said we would round up our session. Let me do that by putting to you a question that is put in the chat by Jacek, and it is a bit more personal. He's saying, Professor Bodnar, have you already considered how you can use your knowledge and skills, not forgetting about personal courage, to further protect human rights and the rule of law in Poland after you finish your current mission as ombudsman?
That's quite a frequent question, to be honest, these days. I think, you know, the first thing, you know, it was really very demanding from also personal point of view, family point of view, time for me. So, you know, almost 6 years, including, you know, this campaign for the ombudsman. And basically, I need to have some time for reflection, for writing, for typical academic work. Professor Brems and other guests are also scholars, and you know well how is it important from time to time to spend the time on a book, on writing something, on writing some articles, on rethinking different issues, and that's why, you know, I'm right now quite involved into my work at the SWPS University in Warsaw, and also on writing different things. Second, but of course, you know, I understand that this mission, my service, was very much important to Polish people, and they gave me a lot of support, and I feel that there is something like the bond of connection between me and the Polish people, and that I shouldn't just waste it, that I should repay this debt of trust that was given to me. And so basically, I will continue to my work in the public service. I will try to cooperate with different civil society actors. I will try to be the independent voice on different human rights issues. I like this American word of public intellectual. So basically, that is, I think, my mission for next years. But later on, we'll see. I don't exclude my continuation in the typical human rights sphere. But maybe, you know, there is maybe at a certain point I will make a decision to join politics, or maybe I will try to do some actions internationally. I had some good experiences with the UN bodies, but also with other international organizations, and it seems to me that my knowledge and experience could be used for a good purpose. But as of now, you know, I really need a time for reflection, for not rest, but for I would rather use the word professional reconfiguration, or that would be the good word for my upcoming years after my service as the ombudsman.
Thank you so much. We wish you the best of luck in any choices you will make. And we hope, of course, to be able to host you in person at Ghent University as Adam Bodnar, the public intellectual, or whatever label. But you are most welcome, and we hope to see you in not too long in person among us. Let's conclude this with the symbolic round of applause that we can give you here. Our warmest thanks to you, Adam Bodnar, for being our 12th Amnesty International chair tonight. Many thanks also to Alicja Gierczynska, to Wies de Grave for being our panelist, for the audience being there online, following, chatting, asking questions, and of course, Ghent University, Amnesty International, the organizers members, those who took the initiative for the chair. It was a fascinating evening, an invigorating evening. Thank you so much and good luck. See you soon.
Thank you. Pleasure and honor is mine. Thank you very much.